Hello, John. Thank you for coming back to the channel. And we have a lot to talk about. But
Yeah.
before we talk about everything that's going on in the news and the world affairs, I want to remind everyone that in the description of this video and all the videos I've been doing with John, there is a link to his website, which allows you to purchase his products. He has a periodical that you can sign up for, and he also does readings. So please click that link and that will take you to his website and that will allow you to purchase his products. So, John, thank you for coming on to the channel, and let's begin with talking about
Yeah,
the world
well,
affairs.
yes, in a way it was good we skipped over last Sunday because it's
Yeah.
I couldn't, I had too many things all coming at once, deadlines and stuff, and
Right.
so I wouldn't have been into it so much. But I thought, you know what, it's probably going to be more interesting a week from now and then, and it is because um y- as usual, I think I'll start with the thing that's kind of the most interesting development that could be something positive, which is rare in this situation when you're looking at the conventional phase of World War III, which started with the Ukrainian. Well, the Cold War II started in 2014 when America backed a Nazi overtaking of in the Maidan coup of the Ukrainian government, and then ever since that, they restructured all the party rules and stuff like that, and basically there's a deep state of Nazis that are running Ukraine these days, and it's well, it basically triggered the rise, as I've said before, since not since Nazi Germany and fascist Italy have we had a European country that actually is under the control of fascists, uh, and the and now it's happened since then. So that basically started Cold War II. Cold War One, actually, everybody gets the number wrong. It officially ended on December 1989. That's when Gorbachev and George H.W. Bush, the senior, were on a boat in the Mediterranean, a big ship, and they had a final meeting to officially close the Cold War. It didn't close in 91 or 90. It was December 1989. But this new one started in 2014. And in prophecy, it's always been something of great concern of mine, especially in Nostradamus's prophecies, that if you have a second Cold War, and when he talks about lasting either seven years and 3 months or 13 years, and so those two, and then it goes to war. So it's we're kind of in that window where the wars happen, and that happened about I guess it would be eight 8 years after the civil war was happening in Ukraine. This thing started with a NATO, I call it NATO, US and NATO's proxy war using Ukraine as the cannon fodder to fight a war with Russia. That's it in a nutshell. Now, what is possible is that as this in the coming month front is going to escalate rapidly. It's beginning, just as I've been saying. It's that the steamroller gets a little faster, faster, faster. But now there's all kinds of signs since the terrorist attack in Crocus Theater in Moscow happened. I go into this in great detail, but what we're seeing, most of us on the alternative medium, um, is that this was actually a ISIS ISIS K. It's kind of like the terrorist special K, like in Kellogg's. But a lot of people, including some people that I very much use as sources, actually I got to write to them, like Scott Ritter and others, that there's a prophetic angle to ISIS K. It originally started. It originally started like ISIS has started, compromised by the CIA. I mean, and the U.S. Army. I mean, Lloyd Austin, who's the current Secretary of Defense, uh, in 2013, he was charged to go in country in Syria and create 20,000 an insurrection army to go up against al-Assad's regime in Syria, his government, and he he basically trained, armed, and created these 20,000 guys that, except for four of them, they all took their guns and their training and said, thank you very much, and went into the Islamic State, became the kind of the central core of well-trained, US trained people. Now that group, when it finally, and then a lot of that breaking up, letting ISIS spread was actually supported by the Israeli state and the United States. There were a lot of ISIS fighters that if they're wounded or they needed to escape from the Syrian army, they could cross over the border and Golan Heights, where the Israelis occupied it. The Israelis let them in. If they're wounded, they went to hospitals and got better. And if they were hungry, they got fed. And if they ran out of bullets, they got all the bullets they need and went back into the fight. This so that was happening even when ISIS was big, when it was taking half of Syria and a quarter of Iraq in 2014, from June, especially at that point. That then created this whole backlash. Actually, one of my readers, Ali Sistani, the Ayatollah of the Iraqi Shia, I would get these notices. Thank you for sending this magazines from his secretary. So people in Ali Sistani's camp, who's the chief Ayatollah in Iraq, and he's still alive. He was old then. He must be pushing 100 now. But so that's when I became very aware that I have to be very clear and speak to all sides in a war, because in this amazing world of cyberspace, all sides are reading me. CIA, ISIS, Al Qaeda, Britain, all of it. So the problem then is that so Sistani rarely talks. He's a practitioner in the Islam of quietude. So it's that's the closest thing to being silent. He lets silence speak and being meditative. But he suddenly spoke to the whole Shia community when ISIS was taking three Iraqi divisions who just ran and left all their billions of dollars of U.S. equipment and tanks and everything, and got rockets and all. Thank you very much. First you had Lloyd Austin, who's now head of the the Pentagon. He got kicked up for his bad work. Those guys always end up being fired up to a higher place.
No, that's true. That's true.
It's
I mean,
true.
my father, he used to he served in the military, and then and then he worked in corporate for a long time. He just said that people, they are elevated up to the highest level of incompetence.
Yeah.
It's not it's
I would argue that that's one of the best examples of that is Kamala Harris,
yeah.
and it was really not. She was fired all the way up to potentially being president, and I would even say, this might ruffle some feathers, Barack Obama. That man really knows how to get to the top, but I can't say once at the top that he really did that well. He was very charming and all that, but I mean, one thing that most people don't know is he's the man responsible for changing the nuclear doctrine. I write about this and show the doctrine as he changed it in my book on Iran and on the Cold War, when it was just starting, the new Cold War. It's a book called The New Cold War, Prophecies of Nostradamus, Stormberger, and Edgar Casey. And I would say to a lot of people, check that out on Amazon. It's in print as well as an ebook. You'll see that that was right at the beginning of this, like April, just a month or two. Oh, it was an anniversary right now in this month. I started writing it when the Civil War started, and the Nazi Ukrainians fighting with the breakaway Russian Ukrainians, who eventually they didn't want to really break away from Ukraine. But when these people were killing them, they said, they were asking Russia, look, we're Russians, people in Russia understand, in the Russian world, that Putin is not any president of Russia. It's not just the leader of the borderlines of what's called Russia. They're also responsible for ethnic Russians, all in the near abroad, that used to be part of the Soviet Union, if they're being persecuted. And I hope you guys in the Baltic states are listening. You don't want to end up like being what Ukraine's about to do, and you also have a lot of Nazis, especially Latvia. They still celebrate openly. They all get in their Feldgrab uniforms, and I mean, they just dress up like German soldiers, and a lot of them are really old now. And so, you're persecuting your Russian populations nearly as badly as, without open violence yet, but bad enough threats. And I must say, when they were all voting, when everybody's saying, "Oh, this big election that Putin had was just a big show. It wasn't real." Well, no, anybody who actually watches Russia over years and sees what's going on there, I would say their democracy, which is not like ours, because they're Russians, and they have their own way of doing things and their own ideas of what freedom is and what also i- is. And I would say, as far as their engines of voting, they're way ahead of us democratically on doing factual elections. It's all paper ballots. It's all filmed. All the 150 main polling bases across Russia, they're all cameraed. Everything's seen, so you you can't hide stuffing ballots, and that's all coming out, folks. There's a lot of stuff. Thank you for Mr. Musk opening the show in X, because a lot of things are happening where they're recounting, they're doing them, and they're finding all kinds of problems from 2020, which I had predicted would happen, and then pretty much couldn't say much about it for years until finally there's this flood, just like COVID. And so the the problem is that you get Nazis in a whenever they get power in Europe, they tend to cause world wars. That's what happened last time, and that's happening now. So, um, and in a strange way, there's also a great struggle happening in Israel with a kind of Israeli form of Nazism, which is Zionism, which has and on this show I've quoted a lot of the leaders and how they kind of they hated him as a person, Hitler, but they admired his modus operandi, and they were openly ready to adopt it on the people that were already there, um, to literally kick them out. That was always the plan. Goes all the way back to the founders of Zionism in the 1880s. That I have quoted them. This has been the plan. So the so the Crocus terrorist attack was, they tried to pin it on ISIS. A very odd thing. When ISIS was destroyed, when Sistani, you got all the 2/3 of the population, or yeah, I mean, most of Iraq is Shia. And when he started to say, form militias, these guys will take, they're going to come, they're coming out of Mosul, they're going to come to Baghdad, they're going to come. And the idea that their idea, the ISIS, of being Sunni extremists, they view Shias as apostate, apostate, blasphemers, and they're also to be killed. So if they had won the rest of Iraq, there'd be millions of Shias that would be killed. And so the whole Shia population rose up, the men rose up. The Iran was much involved in, and because they are also Shia, and they were involved in helping train the formidable army, which lost 35,000 dead and 120 to 200,000 wounded, defeating ISIS from 2014 through 2018. Now America came in the last minute, and Trump liked to showboat about how he was doing it all, as he often does. It wasn't, there were only a few hundred Americans overseeing it on the ground. I think they only lost 3 or 4 in the war, but 17,000 Kurdistani Iraqis and Syrians, Kurds, did all the fighting in Al Raqqa and other places in northeastern Syria. But then what happened is, the United States stayed in country. They're illegally, since the end of that war, in country, and they are guarding the food. The breadbasket of Syria is under their control. The oil is under their control, and without the food and the oil that can light the cities and pay for their rebuilding in the rest of Syria. This is done willfully by Israel and the United States to keep Syria down and weak and divided. And this is either it's like Jordan, they get very subservient, or they're taken down like Syria has been, or they've been taken down a few times by the Israelis and the Americans, but Hezbollah in southern Lebanon has become this motive force of resistance against that. And so Lebanon's kind of in a gray zone with that. But what happened then is I mean, the ISIS, the whole idea of ISIS, it's actually in their writings. ISIS always knew that this Islamic State they created with al-Baghdadi as their caliph was probably going to be martyred. And then what would happen is they expected they would arise in other places again and start the jihad again. So it's all because, for one thing, they know what ISIS-K means, which was what came after in Afghanistan. Um, and the Islamic world knows. And some of the first of my sources happened to be in Idlib, who were reading me from Idlib. So they were Al-Qaeda people. So sympathetic to Al-Qaeda, at least but they were the ones that made me aware of the Hadith, which is the book that was of Muhammad. It's not the Quran. It is the book of Muhammad's trying to interpret as a man what was channeled. And, but it was not him like being so much the prophet. He was just trying to answer questions. And one of the questions that was asked, this was towards the end of his life when the Hadith was created. It was actually a huge book, but it wasn't printed until 3 other centuries had passed. And there are scholars in Ankara, Turkey, that are, or Turkey, I think that's what they want to say. I'm glad they changed that, because they changed it because they're tired of being called a bird, a big dumb bird. So, if America's name was Dumbnut, and we in the land of Dumbnut, well, you want to go Diumnate or something like that, because you don't want to be called a bunch of dumb nuts, and the Turks don't like to be called a bunch of turkeys. So, so anyway, and it sounds right, Turkiye, because that's how they say it in Turkish, and why not? I've always been for people pronouncing names as the natives pronounce them, not Ukraine. It's Ukraina, not Russia. It's Russia. And so it's not France, it's France. It's France. So if you have a bone to contend with me about that, you Americans, we can talk about how you keep calling Iraqis and Iranis when it's Iran. It means in Persian, the land of the Aryans. They are the real Aryans, not the Germans. They're the pure blood. They're the real ancient Aryans. Iran means Aryan. It's an abbreviation. So Iraq, Iran. Well, where did Iran next time? It's so I constantly will, sometimes in some shows, especially shows that do that a lot, I'll just say, well, all us Americans, I'll just do that for a few weeks, calling everybody whenever you do America, you say, America, it's American. You'll get the point. But that will have to bring an awareness of other people, an awareness of the richness of all countries. And one of the problems is that any country that thinks it's exceptional always a psychosis in nationalism. When a country thinks that it has a higher law and a higher right and is higher race, then it tends to ignore rules of law. It does not have mutual respect for fellow human beings, because no, you're a special human being. So, if God tells you to go invade the Iraqis, like Mr. Bush Jr. did, well, that's because he's an exceptional president of an exceptional country. But you will find, and I've quoted it before, when even Obama was saying, we are the exceptional nation. And after he made that speech, I think it was somewhere in 2018 or earlier. Vladimir Putin, the Russian president, bought a page in the New York Times and wrote a little thing that is just very dangerous. No nation is more special than any other nation, including Russia. Just like, because if you do that, then you end up, well, you end up doing the idiotic things that we're doing in the Middle East and in Iraq and Iran and in Ukraine, where well, we're a special nation. So because we're special above the rest of the world, yeah, we can sacrifice Ukraine for our needs because we're special. We can do that. We're the rules-based order. We don't actually tell you what our rules are because we're constantly making them new as they appeal to us, you Americans, you a-hole Americans. And up there in Washington, I'm talking about, because another thing that's pretty amazing about the world, and it might shock a lot of people to understand this, that unlike us, who just depict the Russians as all one kind of people, or these people are as one kind of people, even in war, even though the Russians all know that it's our government, there's a lot of people I know who live in Russia who are from America, and they have this. What's great about internet now, they all have their vlogs and their day-to-day life in Russia, showing everything. And if you just go search it out, you find some amazing stuff. And they're just people. They're left alone. They're not part of the government. They can be critical. There's this one guy from Britain that likes to show all the kind of weird sides of Russia in the areas that are still really post-Soviet in their attitudes and stuff. And I mean, he got kicked out of Russia at the end of his long journey through it because he was just really showing. But it was good to see. I mean, I thought he was a little surprised because he just doesn't understand it. There's that's I'm trying to say that there's a quality about Russia that it's like if you're they gather together for the sake of the country if things go a bit too far and being critical, especially if it's used to feed a stereotype. Just like, we'll look at it this way. Do you see African American people kind of tolerating people making stereotypes out of them? Well, Russia, who has paid the price of stereotypes by losing tens of millions of people to invaders, it's mostly Europeans. So their view is that even amongst their own, if you cross a certain line that's going to create more negativity for the entire community, well, you'll get called on it. And and that's not the way we do things in America. It's different. It's a different kind of democracy. It's Yeah, ours is kind of all individualistic. We do what we want and all of that, and that has its ups and downs. It has its freedoms and restrictions too. But there are people much older than us. They have a culture. They're very literate. They remember the past, because they have to remember the past because it keeps coming back to destroy them, like this Ukrainian war is an attempt to break up Russia once again, like Napoleon tried, like Hitler tried, like Charles XII of Sweden back in 1700 tried. And Charles XII went through the soft underbelly of Russia, which was Ukraine, to try to do that. But Peter the Second, known by some people as Peter the Great, had modernized and Europeanized the Russian army, and his Swedish army was defeated at Poltava, which is one of the oblasts or Ukrainian provinces that are on the east side of the Dnieper River, which probably in the next 2 months, along with Sumy and Chernigov, the Donbass as well, and Zaporozhye, most of Zaporozhye and Kherson. These are all the main Russian speaking areas, a little less up in Sumy and Chernigov, but we're going to see all that become part of Russia by the time this war is over, which could be by September. Of course, there's always a possibility. I mean, I'll tell you right now, if Ukraine was not being used as a proxy to fight and die for American interests and European interests, this war that started on the 22nd of February 2022 would have been over in by the end of 2022, early 2023. We have literally kept this thing going, and it has killed. It's going to it's killed at least 500,000 Ukrainians, and you add to that a few million more injured and wounded, and they're running out of men. Thank you very much, United States. Oh, we were going to be with you. We're going to be with you. We'll always be supporting you. You'll get in NATO someday. Where's all that now? You
You know,
can't. Go ahead.
let me just interject. What I did notice in Boston, you know, and around the Cambridge area, students wearing little buttons that had the Ukrainian
Yes, that
three-prong
weird.
symbol.
Well, you know, it's not Ukrainian. That's what. Just I'll interject and let you go. But it's most people don't understand it. That's that interesting geometric thing that kind of looks like it's like this and a sword coming out of it. That's actually a Kazakh symbol, or it's of the Muslim.
Really?
Yeah, yeah. It's actually
No
it's
kidding.
yeah.
Wow.
It's like it's not. It's the people that were the Muslims that had conquered the area before Katharina the Great took all of that area for Novi Russia. Um, and yeah, it's not actually, its origin is not Ukrainian or
I didn't know
Viking,
that.
not even a Viking rune or anything like that. They love all the Nazi Viking runes since these guys took power, but that it's very beautiful, a little bit yang, but warrior stuff. But
When the war started, you know, you would see
the
all these
Turkic symbol,
students. Yeah, you would have all these students having these pins on their
yeah.
backpack. And
Where are
it
they
was
now?
so, it was, yeah, well, yeah, right, exactly.
And we
But, you
had
know, the
flags
thing,
in this town. We had flags, Ukrainian flags all over the place. They almost outnumbered the transgender flags. It was- now you know, I live in a very deep blue part of Whidbey Island, and which has a red north and a blue south. So we have both worlds here. I'm neither. So you know, I'm a free wing. I'm not a blue ring or a red ring American. I'm just free wing ring. And so yeah. So go ahead. Go and
no, well, I mean, you know, the point I was making is at the very beginning of the war, there were just students that were they really bought into this whole Ukrainian propaganda that the United States was pushing.
that's what happens when
Um,
when your history only goes back a few years, not a few hundred.
mhm,
The
mhm.
myopia of the United States is it's endemic in our own democracy. Now, the Russians remember their sufferings and they try to improve things and their state in their way for Russia, which is not just Russian Slavs, it's 190 different ethnic groups. You know, the whole Russian Federation is made of separate republics, autonomous republics, the Bashiri, the Turkic, Kazan, most famously the Chechens. When Putin first came into power after Yeltsin uh, resigned and gave him that, and then he won his first election. It's a story of how some of the things that you see here now, like if I told you that the future, which I really feel eventually the future of Israel is going to be a return to Palestine with two ethnic groups living there with equal rights and equal protections under the law. And that is the destiny. As wow, crazy as that might sound, even to me, I've seen too often, even another apartheid country, which I grew up with, apartheid in South Africa. I I became aware of the whole issue of racism on a national level in the early 60s when I saw the famous massacre of Mandela's ANC people all demonstrating peacefully, and the white cops came out and mowed them down. And that's the first time I actually saw as a kid dead people, dead black people. And I thought, wow, what's this? And then, as usual, in my very tender age, after the Cuban Missile Crisis kind of opened my eyes in an adult way, where I wanted to know how the world ticked, because it almost busted itself and broke down, and I almost carried me and my brother and my life and my family, with it. And so I was really shocked as a kid. So I started inquiring. Anyway, as I followed the trajectory of it getting worse and worse in apartheid South Africa, I also noticed that it became a pariah, just as Israel is becoming a pariah, in a very similar way, because Israel is apartheid, and a step worse, is committing mass genocide. And now the world is not happy with it. Israel has lost all its friends. And we're going to get to some things a little later that might show that they might be getting it, that the jig is up. They got to stop doing this, but maybe not. Anyway, a little later, I'll talk about that, but in this talk. But when I saw how things were just getting worse and worse in the 70s in South Africa, I thought, South Africa's doomed. They're just going to kill each other. I couldn't see, how could this ever change? It was so intractable. So from the genetic racial side on both sides, uh, it was like, and how does it end? Well, it did end. And guess who ended it? The white supremacists. They finally, I mean, a catalyst was very helpful, that Nelson Mandela was freed. So they were suffering economically. For a long time, Israel was their number one ally, when everyone else was banishing South Africa from the Olympics, from economy of the world. I mean, it was Israel that even though they had to officially join everybody else in word only, they still secretly supplied armed, uniformed, and gave the APC, armored personal carriers, that the police ran around with. Those are all Israeli made. Is the South African army and its military police were clothed, armed, and drove around Israeli gear. And it's also, South Africa was the place where Israelis were able to test their atomic bombs. That's a whole other story, but it's all got data there. There was an ocean blast off the coast of South Africa. It was an ocean shot, and there was, in the Kalahari Desert, Israelis were letting off aerial nuclear explosions long after the anti-testing treaty was going. This would be in the 60s, especially towards the late 60s, when they fired up their own hydrogen bombs. And so there's a karmic connection to America, South Africa, and Israel that is quite interesting in this regard. But first, the thing that when finally it was de Klerk, the head president, who's had great influence, he finally started to say, we can't sustain this anymore. We can't sustain, and it's tiring, it's wearying us. And unlike a lot of Israeli Jews, they don't have dual citizens to bug out, like most of the population may do if things get to a certain point. If the economy of Israel completely tanks, which is really in trouble right now. Nobody's talking about it, but the Yemenis are winning this war by blocking the shipping. And, it's showing the weakness of Israel, being a small country of 7 million people in a sea of 441 million Arabs and an extra 18 million Iranians. And let's not forget the 20, 30 million Turks, who the people really, really hit Erdogan's local elections. He was told by the people in the streets of Turkey that they want him not to placate what's going on in Jerusalem right now. And so anyway, what finally happened is weariness of the white South Africans. And they had a help. They had Mandela, and the ANC was actually they also understood, look, we all got to live together. So we got to find a way to live and let live. Let the past go. no more blood feuds that were just killing everything in South Africa. And within a few years, in the late 80s, uh, when they released Mandela, I think, and it changed. And by 1992, I was watching a miracle. South Africa were turning a new leaf. The white and black South Africans have been working as much as they can. It's not been easy, but it is nothing like it was the chaos and violence and racism and genocide even that was going on. So so it happened. South Africa is a context. It's possible. I mean, who would have imagined Nazi Germany in the middle of World War II would end up being a peaceful country again, rather than a country that has to be not only just utterly destroyed, but the Morgenthau Plan was even seriously considered to deindustrialize Germany into an agrarian society so these madcap Germans don't start another war. Two already. Of course, that's not fair. Um, the Germans were part. Everybody, if the Versailles Treaty had been fair, everybody would have paid something out. They were all guilty, all of them. Even America for not getting in until the end, was also part of it. So everybody needed to pitch in the war reparations to build everybody. But when it was all blamed on the Germans, well, Marshal Foch, when he heard the Versailles Treaty, he kind of struck his head and said, we've just signed an armistice for 20 years, and then we'll start again. Another world war is coming. He saw that in 1919. 20 years later, 1939, World War II began. So, um, and some German historians, I think rightfully, call the period between 1914 and 1945 the Second German 30 Years' War, with a 4-year violent beginning, a 20-year hiatus kind of pause, and then a very bloody 5-year, 6-year ending. And yeah, I mean, if you understand the great religious civil war that happened across the Palatinate and Bohemia and the areas from let's see when it started. It started in 1618, and it ended in 1648, a 30 Years' War. Germany was almost as completely destroyed as it was in World War II. That was the other thing. Germany was the area. What happened is there'd maybe be 1 or 2 battles a year, but most of the fighting and dying was in intersecting violence, with each invading army, if it was Protestant or if it was going Catholic, they go in the other religions area and they would just destroy the people and destroy everything, to where large tracts of what we call Germany were deserts with ruins. Half the people of Middle Europe were killed in 30 years. The population declined by half. And but it changed. When people say it's a question of not just your country, but whether you go to heaven or hell in a time of very passionate religious feelings, who would have thought that it often happens in history that these things play out and they exhaust themselves. Everything has entropy. Peace has entropy as much as war. And it just the clerk and the whites in South Africa just got tired, and they gave up and they tried to find a peaceful solution. This is going to be, if Israel survives this, if it does not use one of its nukes and find itself from its own hand being responded to in an annihilation as a nation, which is that is the worst case scenario. But again, a lot of worst case scenarios were in my head when I looked at the future of South Africa. So hopefully there's a good thing that some of those worst case scenarios are in our heads, because it's like what I say in my newest bunch of articles, which I'm releasing overnight. I have an essay where I say the fear It's healthy to fear the God named mad. M.A.D. Mutually assured destruction. It's like, and I talk about there's a positive side to being afraid. Afraid is not a weakness if it sharpens your whole being to either stand and fight or run from danger. It's if you're not going to stand and fight a tiger running, you're going to run. you know you're going to teach your children not to be afraid of the flame and not stick your hand to play with the nice pretty light, or they get their burnt hand. Fear has its role in this world too. It's not there's no such thing as a fearless world, because it'll be if it's fearless, it knows fear as an agent of fearlessness. It's only cowards that become courageous. You don't stamp out cowardliness. If you do, you're going to stamp out courage. You know, you you don't live just for hope and deny hopelessness. In fact, when people say, "Have you have any hope for us?" And I say, "None, none at all. Therefore, I have no hopelessness either, because of the same. I'm in a different place. I'm neither hopeful or hopeless." Then where are you? Free of that. That's another way of being. So the as these now that we're in it, and as a medium in my reading work and stuff, I did not even have the language to respond to it, because we weren't in it like we are now. I kept it quiet, because I thought, if there will be a knowing by being so close to the abyss, then my language will change. I'll be starting to talk about what is good about the abyss, what is good about the terror. It's like, stop putting your hand in fire. Be afraid of the fire. Don't do mad. Mutually assured destruction. That When I grew up with the first Cold War in its worst moment in the Cuban Missile Crisis, when I became 7 on the 13th day of the 13 days in October '62. It really defined my life, and as I've said before, but it we had a healthy fear of nuclear war, the Russians and us. Unfortunately, we have lost our fear. Fortunately for us, the Russians haven't. They don't forget the past, because the past does not let them forget, because some things that have happened in the past are too terrible to forget, because you might go to sleep and let the idiot NATO people just walk all over you, like Charles the 12th, Hitler, Napoleon. So Russians have been slapped a good few times, like by the Zen stick that says, don't forget your history. Don't live in the past. That's psychotic. That's the past is gone, but the past lessons are context, and because it keeps rhyming and repeating itself in new forms. Now, Americans just, one of the beautiful things about America is it's a baby country, so it's got some maturing to do, but it's also beautiful because it's an innocent country. You know, it but it's become a very powerful country without having suffered the Russian Revolution or Operation Barbarossa of Adolf Hitler killing 27.5 million Russians in 3 years. It has not had it's LA and San Francisco bombed like Hiroshima and Nagasaki by nuclear weapons, when the country was already losing and had none. That gets me back to Mr. Obama's nuclear doctrine. He changed it so that it basically helped kind of create this idea of talking your way out of forgetting the past. Nuclear doctrine changed so that we reserved the right of first use. Not only that, but under Obama, he put it in there, Mr. Smiling, Charming Barack Obama. He also put in, and we reserve the right to attack a non-nuclear nation with nuclear weapons. We're going to do what we did to the Japanese to you in 1945. And that's still there. We are the only country that's ever used these horrible weapons. And in these articles I'm writing that I'm publishing overnight, there's an intriguing thing that there was a period there from 1945 to 1948 or 49 where the Pentagon was seriously working on plans to invade Russia. And because we had the nukes, they didn't. And we were thinking, oh, well, we'll use them and who's going to stop us? Yeah, that's being special idiot. And so it probably would have ended the same way. America is not big enough, and that's why they didn't go in, even with nukes, to help them break up the Soviet Union and then parse it out to all the different people and its resources for freedom. We're going to liberate the Russians. No, we're just going to slave them and then take their resources, like we liberated the Shawnee or Pawnee or the Sioux or another. Name your 500 nations of North America. We liberated you. Um, we liberated your land for us, you know. Well, we gave you reservations. Adolf Hitler used to read German translations of a kind of racist guy made cartoons and then short stories, and he was an avid reader of cowboys and Indians. Hitler, when he was a boy in Linz, Austria, he even talks about it in Mein Kampf. And he was inspired by him. He was inspired by. He said, "We've got to do to the Jews what the Americans did to the Indians: concentrate them." In fact, concentration camps was a term that was created by the British, another imperial empire that was very racist in a lot of things it did in its empire. And the idea was the Boers in South Africa, the white Afrikaners, during the Boer War, a lot of the people were gathered up and put and guarded over by British troops in concentration camps. Hitler was looking at that too. He said, yeah, we do the reservation concentration camp. We do Warsaw ghettos, put a wall around them. They can't go in, they can't leave, they can't, unless we tell them to. They can maybe go out and work a little bit, but then they're always watched. And we have our own people there, of their people that are our Sonderkommando, our police force. And let's just move that to Gaza Strip, the new Warsaw Ghetto. And it's exactly the same game going on. Remember your history. There's some people who selectively remember their history in a way that satisfies their agenda. That's the other problem. We just don't care about history that much. But what's also dangerous is when history becomes a kind of myth that is not true. For instance, it started in Nazi Germany. They started to try to create this idea and a whole new archaeology that the Aryans were like the source race of all great things. And they went to Tibet and tried to find Aryan locations. And Von List was one of the guys doing this a lot. It gets kind of into Indiana Jones here, but they were doing it. Mythery creates misery. History, if learned, avoids misery. But history becoming mythery becomes misery. And there's a lot of mythery in Zionism, as much as there were in the Aryan Nazism. It's so strange to see the parallels happening. And the threat is as complete as it was nearly wiping out Germany for Israel. So let's see if I can go back to finish some of those threads I left hanging. The the Nazism, this kind of racial supremacism, cannot be negotiated with. Now, this is one of the, I'm saying something that's like, out, South Africa will never get better. Remember that point, because I'm saying that now. I don't think there is any hope for Ukraine not to repeat the final days of Nazi Germany. It's that is going to repeat itself because it literally is the unbroken thread from Nazism in Germany that became embedded in Ukrainian Nazis who were allies with the Germans. And it never was stamped out by the Soviet Union. It remained he when it was all over, a lot of the Banderites who were Ukrainian Nazis were put in Soviet prisons. But when Khrushchev came to power, he made a mistake. He released them all. So Nazism was not stamped out. It wasn't stamped out in Germany. The Cold War preempted it. The denazification of Germany did not happen. A lot of the Nazis ended up working for CIA and NATO. And, even some of the guys that were tampering in those Mengele kind of doctor experiments on Jews. Well, one of them was the guy who created thalidomide babies. He became he was a citizen, no longer an SS officer, and he ended up being very much he was doing the mad Nazi scientist stuff, and that's where you get the thalidomide babies. It comes from him. So you know, people who have been Nazis, they can never have power. They can never have power again after they finish their tour of prison. They cannot uh, they cannot run for office because we already know their works from previous runs. And so, it's just a reality that some things you just can't be in power again. And and we hope that you live your life, and when you die out, your Nazism dies with you. If you are unrepentant, okay, that's your responsibility to live like a Nazi, die like a Nazi, but go away in those ways. But it's generational stuff, and so the the problem in Israel is that because it has taken on all the trappings of divine biblical prophecy, which gets me back into my field. Um, I know the prophecies of Amalek and Saul and Samuel, books of Samuel 1 and 2, and all the other things. I know the evolution of how Abraham and his descendants tried to interpret the messages that God purportedly gave them for the creation of Eretz Israel, Greater Israel. I've told that it's one of those things where if the first three quotes of God laying out what the lands of his seed would be was clearly that the seed of both Ishmael and Isaac would be living there in peace. And then it became a thing where the communities hardened, and then interpretations changed. But when you can always, whether it's true or not, if you always got a backstory where when you're cornered, you just say, God told me. What are you going to say about that? It's like, well, this is from God, not from people. I mean, even in the Hindus, the Bhagavad Gita, I've read it a lot because my teacher Osho gave me the name Arjuna as my name, and a Sanskrit name, and Arjuna was the king that fought in the great Mahabharata Indian War. Bharat is the ancient name of India, and Krishna was another king of Vrindavan. He The opposite general wanted him and his army to fight on his side, as they were all making sides against Arjuna's army. And there's this wonderful story where, because this guy was full of himself, this king, he got there before Arjuna. So he's sitting next to Krishna's ear while he's taking a siesta. And he's like just pressing his point. And then Krishna was just kind of half sleeping and waiting. And then he's waiting for Arjuna to show up, because Arjuna was his friend and disciple. And Arjuna came, and the first thing Arjuna did is went to his feet and touched his feet with his forehead as he was sleeping there. And then Krishna woke up and he says, now we'll speak about this matter. You wish to have my army, thousands of men and elephants, to fight on your side. It's already really large, and you want me to command it. Here's what I will do. You can have my army. but Arjuna can have me as his chariot driver. And Arjuna was overjoyed. He said, I'd rather have him than an army that I need. So there he was, the chariot driver. He was rolling Arjuna in his big chariot. He was a famous archer. He was superhero archer. He could do all kinds of things with archery. And so he's rolled out into the battlefield of truth, it was called. And he looked around. He saw all of his mentors, all the people, Dronacharya, his guru of archery, all his friends, everybody except for his brothers. There were 5 of them, and their one wife, and then all this army. He didn't even want the crown. He wasn't interested in it, but it became his crown, and all these people wanted to take it back. And they were going to destroy India in a big war over it, and so Arjuna lost his nerve. He started breaking down, and he got off the chariot and hit his face up against the wagon wheel. And he said, Krishna came down. What is it? And he said, I don't need this crown. I never wanted it. I see all those people I've got to kill. I don't want to kill them. Many of them have been my friends, my teachers. I don't want to kill them. I don't want this crown. I just want to go meditate in the Himalayas and leave this whole mess. If these people want it, let them have it. So Krishna basically, the Bhagavad Gita, which is one small chapter in this vast volume about that big, it's one of the longest books. I'm trying to do the same with Nostradamus, but not that long. So it's basically Krishna trying to convince kind of an idea that's like what I understand is like a morality that's beyond good and evil as we know it. That there are bigger things that require people play in the play of life to do certain things. And he was trying to argue to him that it is your destiny, because you are the king of Bharat, it is your destiny to be victorious and destroy all these other people who are trying to take the crown. And Arjuna was very good at bouncing back with difficult questions. I mean, Krishna even had to go to the point of showing his divine form to him, which is one of the most amazing things in Indian. I mean, that's what I was very attached to because of certain experiences I've had. It sounded like he was having something like I think I've described my Akashic record experience on the show a few weeks back, but where basically Krishna showed, it's just like when Zeus fell in love with Semele. There was this point where the love, she couldn't understand who he really was, and he would have to show his true self. But the very light of his true self, he knew was going to ruin the love, and so she would like be fried by it. It would be too much. So that's a variant in Western mythology, but in this, Krishna shows his divine form, and there's amazing paintings and the kind of special Hindu artwork that's kind of realist, where realism kind of meets cartoonism in a perfect harmony. And so it's like you got Arjuna kind of trying to hide behind his hands as he's namasteing at what he's seeing. And like Krishna is like all these infinite forms of Krishna that kind of look like Krishna, but they're also not Krishna. And they're in rows and rows and labyrinths coming up close and far away. They're everywhere. And they're every aspect of something good, something evil, something this, something that. And just like an incredible kaleidoscope of Krishnas in different forms forever and ever all around this guy. And he's finally saying, please, please, master, come back to your normal self. This is all I can take. And still he resisted Krishna. And so finally Krishna did what all people, even Krishna, do, who, when they can't win an argument, when they can't say something intelligent, they go to the irrational and say, it's God's will, so do it. Which is really saying, I can't parlay. I can't, your arguments are too strong for me. Instead, you just invoke God. Well, God told us about the Amalekites, and the Palestinians are the Amalekites. And that's, this has become a very religious, very dangerous mythology. that is now where the past is, when you're the only people who survived to write the histories of the Bible, that makes a lot of the stories suspect. The winner always makes the story right for the winner. You don't hear a book of Amalekites or the Moabites or the Canaanites. You only hear about them from the victors who wiped them off the promised land. So how can that be anything but very one-sided? And so that one-sidedness of taking the past and turning it into a mythology is just really bringing Israel to, unfortunately, by kind of setting themselves up. It goes both ways. It's also in the mythology that, there were times in the past, Jeremiah, when he was trying, repent, walking down naked down Jerusalem, repent, repent, was before the Babylonians came and conquered the two kingdoms of Judah and Israel. And then the survivors were cast into Babylon in the Babylonian captivity, and the kingdom was utterly destroyed. So even in the historical evidence, Israel has had its 30 years war. It's Nazi German 30 years war. It has also been utterly destroyed. And it's always, even in the Bible, it's when they've lost their way, when they've mythologized righteousness to be something else, when they have lost their way and God now must smote them hard. I'm not supporting or refuting that kind of view, but it's a view there. And a lot of my Kabbalist contacts are saying that they're setting themselves up. The Torah Jews are saying this all the time. Even the Torah Jews living in Israel. Hey, this Israel, it's Jeremiah time. Repent. You're going astray, and God's going to give you one big spanking. And so pride, you know, is a powerful word in the Bible. It can be used in many dimensions, but pride, the pride of racial supremacy, of being the chosen people of Abraham's seed. I mean, the Palestinians, who are also of Abraham's seed, are not. God chose us to take back our lands, even though the Palestine was there. This can only lead in either, hopefully, in an exhaustion of the strain of being under siege, which happened in South Africa, or it leads to the utter devastation of the 30 Years' War, of Nazi Germany, of being repeated in the small little nation of Israel, with all the people cast into a second diaspora out of the area. That's all really real possibilities. And also, for a bigger picture, there is the final battles, variations of that in Daniel and Ezekiel and Isaiah, that are kind of the inspiration for St. John's Revelation, kind of the next chapter, but it's on the foundation of what later became called the Old Testament from the Nevi'im. And self-fulfilling prophecies. I mean, Armageddon, for instance, I've written long about this, that there are arguments in the Preterist views of Christianity that basically say the real apocalypse that St. John and Patmos Island was really going after was the burning of Jerusalem, as marking the end of the age of the Old Testament and the beginning of the New Testament, marked by the catastrophic apocalypse of Rome destroying utterly Jerusalem, which happened in 69, 70 AD, about over 30 years after Jesus was crucified. And the immediacy of the language in Book of Revelation makes it clear. It's almost to ad nauseum. He's saying this is coming in our time. It's coming now, not 2,000 years. There's no way that can be construed. Unless you go to the small apocalypse, which is where Jesus was looking at the temple with his disciples, and says this whole thing could be taken down, and in 3 days, this body will be resurrected. And he's speaking kind of mixed metaphor about his own body resurrection and the resurrection of the temple, but the temple being he tried. Then they asked him, "What do you mean by that?" And that's actually the closest that Jesus came directly talking prophecy. That uh, end time prophecy. It's a little apocalypse. It's in Matthew, and I think it's also John as well. Um, and it's about, if you can read it without all the 2,000 years of Sunday school, just read it like you've just seen it innocently. When I look at it, it's Jesus talking. You could construe that it's Jesus, especially around Matthew 22 or 27, where he's talking about, the people coming up to him and said, "We casted out demons, we healed people, we prayed in your name, and we did all this stuff. Why are you forsaking us?" And he basically said, "I never knew you, and you didn't know me. Get away from you den of iniquity." Cast. He banished them from his sight. You know why? Because his name isn't Jesus. It's Yeshua. Yeah. This was a Jewish reform movement that Paul turned into Paulianity and Romanized better than the Romans could do. So this Romanized cult religion, that it was never intended. And I think that if you read Matthew without the programming, you could make an argument, which if I have time, I will try to make an argument about how a lot of it, I do in some parts, I will write articles about it. How you could really say, well, he's saying you never knew me because you went off with Paul and did this whole mythology. And, and if you were all here when I was alive and yelled Jesus, I wouldn't have even turned my head, because that name was never uttered when he was alive. That all came afterwards. So, the main crisis in the little apocalypse of the Mount of Olives sermon is about a crisis in spiritual truth at the very highest levels. And interestingly enough, the Catholic sect of Christianity gets this. The and I would say probably even getting it deeper are the Eastern Orthodox Christians, who, how can I, it would take me hours to talk about, but if I distilled it in something brief, the difference between the Latin Church and the Protestant churches, and the difference between the Russian Orthodox, Greek Orthodox, Nestorian Christian Orthodox, is that there's like the West is demanding God do things and fulfill things according to their wishes, according to how they interpret things. And in the East, the Eastern Orthodox think it's not our place to talk to God in that way. It's not our place to kind of try to push God, like all the evangelicals are having wet dreams right now about how this, we're so close now because we got to have the Jews and Israel destroyed. That's like they've got this idea that's what's supposed to happen. They never questioned that maybe it's about stuff that was supposed to happen in the first century and symbolically, and the only big violent thing was Jerusalem being sacked. But they've taken that whole thing in, well, when Jesus comes, we love our Jews, we're going to kind of go with them because we're again, it's just like America is not interested in Ukraine's future, they're interested in what they can get out of it. And a lot of these evangelical Zionists, Christian Zionists, who are worse in some ways because they're just goading it on. And the whole motivation is, our view is that all you Jews have to either convert or be destroyed. So they're trying to kind of bring this issue to a head. And this is what's so strong. One of the things that makes America such an enabler politically for all this is, I think, a very twisted and misinterpreted look at Book of Revelation. It's not the veil lifted, it's a stone wall coming down, stone wall of the Wailing Wall. And it's not done for any goodness towards Jews in Jerusalem or Israel. It is, they are to be sacrificed. And now Netanyahu and those guys, they understand the game. So, but they've been playing a dangerous game with, Jimmy Jones kind of cult Christian people who have a lot of power. And he's playing, this guy likes to tap dance in some pretty dangerous tap dance floors. I mean, he's tap dancing around all kinds of danger. I guess it makes him alive, I guess. He's got immense energy. It's amazing how much toxic stuff he goes through that he just comes through it. He lives off of it, and he wants to keep the show going. But it's getting now to the head where these people he's been shining on in the evangelical Zionist wing of Christians, they're kind of thinking, you know what, final act's coming. It's coming. Jesus is coming. So let's hasten it so Jesus comes. It's God's will. Now, in Eastern Orthodox, they don't do that. The whole thing is centered around, I'm not going to tell God how to run his creation. I'm just going to try to be a virtuous and good Christian and not do evil and do my best to just live the compassion and love that Jesus taught us. And I personally feel a little more pulled to Eastern Orthodox Christianity because of that. It feels like it's more like the way it was at the beginning. And I think the West Christians have kind of gone far away from that, making them the people trying to tempt God to do stuff. Um, so, which brings me back to ISIS K. Why is it called K? I'm kind of surprised that some of the Scott Ritter and really good sources of mine. I highly recommend you all listen to these people, or there's some like Giraldi and Judge Napolitano, Judging Freedom. He has a lot of really amazing people on his show. But I've noticed all these intelligence officers, really good ones. Uh, they're now retired or had been retired by force. Um, None of them have brought it up. So I am going to actually send him an email and ask him if he's aware of what the K means. And I will tell you all what it means. Now we're entering into the apocalyptic prophecies of Islam, which people in the West almost do not know anything about. And it's to their detriment because everything you see in ISIS and Al Qaeda and ISIS K and the Salafist, general Salafist Islamic movements, jihadi movements, are all rooted, both Shia and Sunni Muslims of these extremists, rooted in the apocalypse that was one of Muhammad's prophecies in the Hadith, where he was somebody asked him a question about, well, what's going to happen in the future, when the judgment happens, and he basically talked about that there, and I've in my works I have it all kind of laid out. It's like this long narrative where Muhammad talks about, well, what I think is going to happen. He's not like this, the hadith is not his channeling of Allah. It is trying to, as a Muslim, understand what Allah is saying, the mystery of what it is. And so in daily life and in things that all intrigue us in the future, it was also one of them. Basically, what he described is how there would come a time where the Muslim world would be rich, which did happen a few centuries after. It was the golden era of the Muslim, the great Arabic sprawling empire of all across North Africa into Persia and all the way into Granada and Spain. And there was a period of plenty. Great literature was written, algebra was created, numbers were created, a lot of wonderful things were happening. A lot of the classics of the Mediterranean world were preserved in Arabic, a lot of the Roman philosophers and things, they preserved it as much as the monks in the north, perhaps even more. Uh, and so then what happened is that it there would come, he said, like the Christians, the Crusaders would come, and they would, that was seen, and he was eventually, what would happen is that the Muslim world would become very poor and exploited by the West. So people were already seeing when the colonial things were happening, especially after 1918 and all, and the breaking up the Ottoman Empire. It was already beginning. People were starting to notice, this is kind of the preliminaries to the final judgment as we see it. And then finally what happens is that you would know when the final great jihad was happening. He said that in the jihad, the ummah, the community of believers, which now is pushing 2 billion, it's almost 2 billion now, in the world. These believers would, he said, half of them would survive it as victorious. The more blessed half would be shaheed, martyrs, and then the other third was destroyed as the unbelievers of the Muslim faith that lost their way. And it depends on which extremist end time side you take, who's wrong. If it's the Shia, it's the Sunni. If it's the Sunni, it's the Shia or the apostates. And so in this kind of extreme end time thinking. And so they have the problem in Islam too. But the key is Muhammad said that these fighters would come sheathed in black, and you would know them by their black flags. A sea of black flags and men in black turbans, and they would come out of far off Khorasan. Khorasan is the ancient name of Eastern Afghanistan. You wonder why Al-Qaeda had 80,000 people being trained to be terrorists and wearing black. They were following this prophecy. They thought, well, it's about us. And then when ISIS did this whole thing in Syria and in Iraq, making an Islamic State, which they knew would be destroyed because it was, they're all trying, this is all part of coming home. So they come home, they're all martyrs. They believe they all went to seventh heaven and everything's fine with them in this process. And it would continue, and the resistance would continue because they were not the people in Khorasan. Otherwise, they would have built the Islamic State in Khorasan. That was born from there because out of Al-Qaeda came ISIS. It's a more evil descendant. So what then happens is this huge wave, the great sea of Khorasani jihad would come across. It's a lot like Dune in a way, it's like the Fremen, and it has a similar, as I'm sure I can tell that Herbert read Islamic prophecies. And so they go all the way to Jerusalem. You ever wonder where you're hearing this name all the time called Al-Quds? It's a Persians use it, Sunnis use it. It's the name in Arabic and Persian, Farsi, for Jerusalem, Al-Quds. And that's where Muhammad launched off into paradise on his horse, so they say, on the mount that once had the temple of Hebrews. It was destroyed in the Roman destruction of Jerusalem. And a lot of people want to actually rebuild that. In fact, there was even some, again, rumors of people wanting to blow up Al-Aqsa Mosque before Eid ends. That comes up every Eid, but hopefully it will not happen, because that will definitely start a war across the Muslim world against Israel. Now you're talking about 2 billion people with a B against 7 million Jews. So it's like begging for the impossible, to happen. So that's we're actually, another thing, there's a lot of talk going on. Paul and I were talking about it before the show started is this whole issue about if you're going to build the temple, you have to all the red heifers, which is a very special species of red oxen cows, that are used only for sacrifice. And there's even from my contacts in Kabbalism, which are not really a part of this, they're an older part of Judaism than this stuff, which is post-Babylonian. It's more this whole idea of it's actually very Persian, this idea of the final struggle and all that. I mean, it's and I've even had Jewish scholars just when I first wrote my first book 52 books ago, and they said, hey, are you aware about this? And so early on I was being helped to know this, that what a lot of us call Jewish religious Judaistic ideas are really Persian influenced since Babylon captivity and Daniel. But before that's the Kabbalah. And it is, if you want to go back to the source of Judaism, it's the Kabbalah. And so the Kabbalah people are looking at this as a misinterpretation. It's going to lead to the destruction of Israel. And but before we get back into that, the red heifers is you can't just build the temple. You have to have red heifers that have pure red eyelashes that are truly red, not a spot of white on them. And it looks like they've been breeding some. I've been watching this thing for 20 years, and I'm thinking, wow, they're getting close. And some people are claiming that they actually might have given birth to in all the ways described that the heifer has to be completely red eyelashes, no spots, kind of a reddish brown. And so now it's talked about between Passover and Rosh Hashanah that maybe in the next few months. I don't think anybody's going to do. The sacrifice happens on a new moon, but I don't think doing it on this new moon that's about to hit tomorrow, it would be a good idea. Um, uh, Another new moon, maybe in October, would be better. But in this year, a great milestone is potentially going to happen where a red heifer is going to be sacrificed. It hasn't happened since 70 AD. And so now there's a whole other view. The Kabbalists have this view that the third temple is not supposed to be built. It's inside your heart. There's a similar thread we talked about in other shows that even Christianity has that thread that the third age, which the age is the Holy Spirit, which starts maybe in 2033 with the crucifixion, resurrection, claim of Christ, is the end of middlemen preaching to us that God then has a direct connection with every human being. So there's no need to make special temples and all that. You are the temple. Um, so the so what then finally happens is this great Muslim jihad goes all the way to Jerusalem and converts the Jews and takes back Al-Quds. And it's kind of left open what happens after that. It's not so stuck into the eschatological uh, end times like Judaism and Christianity has been so caught up in. Again, Persian influence. Paul and some of his people saw a great opportunity in telling, talking about the Persian religion, very popular in the day, called Mithras. Mithras is about a Messiah from Persia who was born of a virgin who died, was killed, and was resurrected. And his Holy Eucharist is almost verbatim the Holy Eucharist that Christianity uses. So a Romanization. Now, Rome also was influenced by religions of the East, the Isis cult, which is something completely different than ISIS. It's a lunar Asian cult or religion. Cults are only religions that don't have political power. Otherwise, the definition of the two is indistinguishable, except that one has political power and the other does not. So, um, So Mithras was spread all over the Roman world because the Roman soldiers really liked it. And since they guarded the Rome, it went all over Rome. And it was a big, there was also a Sol Invictus, which was the major religion. That's where you get the halos around people. That was adopted by Christianity for the saints. That's the solar halo. There was a one god named Sol Invictus, Sun Vic, the great, the one God, as one God religion. And it was very much like Christianity for pagans. And Constantinople is named after. Who was the famous guy that created Constantinople? I can't remember his name at the moment.
Constantine.
Constantine. Constantine.
Right.
Yeah, Constantine was a worshiper of Sol Invictus. And so he didn't see a problem making a political deal with the Christians in his civil war. He said, look, I'll end this pariah edict that's happened since for 1,000 years or so, or 300 years. So if you side with me, then I will establish Christianity as because it's so much like Sol Invictus. I'll make this arrangement and we'll be all right. And it's all it's like Sol. So anyway, he did that, and actually he believed that the Book of Revelation was foreseeing him. And I mean, he makes a pretty good argument about it. That's why one should always kind of be humbled by how easily somebody can interpret it another way. And his whole Council of Nicaea was to organize Christianity and decide which books were right and which books were wrong. And he oversaw that, and he really thought, well, I'm the person that brought Sol Invictus and Christianity together. And just when he was dying, he just to play it safe, he got baptized with oil or something like that. But he basically never was a Christian. He was a follower of Sol Invictus, which was adopting many of its ideas. And even the bald pate on the top of monks, that was part of the Vestal virgins. That's where you get nuns. They were virgins too. And all of these pagan ideas, including Christmas and Easter and all that, were all come from Rome and its interest in Eastern religions, which ultimately Christianity was the newest one from the East and the one that finally was the most popular. So ISIS-K has tried to repeat what Al-Qaeda tried to do. It is now based itself in the place where the great jihad is supposed to come in the end times. That is why they're in Afghanistan, in the same mountain areas that Al-Qaeda and all those folks were training in. So it is important to know that, but what's also important to know that is that what's ever left of ISIS is a prostitute to the CIA. The surviving remnants of them are all around the base Al-Tanf in East Syria, where Americans have a large base, and they're trying to reconstitute them as a form of a tool of the CIA to keep chaos and disorder in the Muslim world. And I have seen a number of ISIS survivors are in the Ukrainian armed forces. They are clearly speaking Arabic. They have the ISIS flag and a patch. There are hundreds of them there getting their war training in the fight as mercenaries, as CIA supported. And so when you hear, oh, only hours after that theater was blown up and people were shot by those 4 Tajik men. By the way, the CIA uses Tajik men a lot in a lot of their fights around the surrounding near abroad of the former Soviet states. to kick up trouble in those areas. Tajiks are often used because they're so poor that they, well, if they're ISIS, they would have never blurred their faces, showing their faces. What would have happened is they would show them, yeah, here he is, every inch of him, this person, and he's dead now because he's a martyr. ISIS never escapes a massacre they create. They would have stayed there and fought the police until they would have had bombs on their bodies. They would have thrown themselves at people with when they ran out of bullets, they pull the pin and blow themselves up. That's how ISIS works. These guys didn't do that. They're, as Scott Ritter will call it, he says, if you ever work in intelligence agencies and stuff like that, just see where they call home and where they try to get back after the incident. Where were these guys, 4 guys, going? To Ukraine, to Bryansk. They were trying to get across the border in Bryansk. So there's a lot of, and when you realize there were like 12 CIA bases built after 2014, how do I know? New York Times did a whole huge expose about this last month, and which I thought, well, that's kind of interesting that they're laying all that much of the cat out of the bag. What does that mean? The jig's up and you want to take credit because it's all going down. A lot of those bases were destroyed by the Russians. And so so, so when they suddenly, I mean, why would the Americans know within hours who did it? And why are these the same American guys saying a few weeks before to Americans living in Russia, oh, don't go to big venues or theaters or anything like that?
Right.
And there's going to be something big, and it's going to be a terrorist attack. And then when it happens, they're immediately chirping about, yeah, it was, yeah, ISIS. It's not the Ukrainians. That got exposed completely. Yes, it was. There's a lot of ISIS footprint in Ukraine, as well as Nazis running it. So, I mean, here's the reason. What's the difference between a Ukrainian Nazi and an ISIS Salafist jihadist? You have Ukrainofascism, Islamofascism. Basically, ISIS is an Islamofascist idea. It's a fascist sheen upon Islam, with it being racial and all the things like Mein Kampf. It's just another extract of the same plague that overtakes human minds, and it can only be stamped out. You can't negotiate. You can't have Hitler resolving a peace treaty with the Allies. He had to go down, and his country with him. Now, that brings me back to this other issue, which may be an impossibility being possible as South Africa not destroying itself. Maybe there's a chance that Israel, in its fascist state right now, will not end up like a fascist state, totally destroyed. A lot of pressure is being put on Israel. It is becoming a pariah faster than South Africa could even dream of. And we had this terrible thing happen where the Israelis basically bombed Iran. First time they've ever done that openly. They send terrorists in there. They send even ISIS in there. Because, as I said, Mossad and ISIS has a big connection as much as the CIA. The attack on April Fool's Day, strangely enough, of 3 missiles hitting the embassy in Damascus and taking out the consulate of Iran, the embassy of Iran. In international law, an embassy is an attack on Iran. That property is not a part of Damascus or Syria any more than the U.S. embassy in Moscow is part of Russia. No, you walk through that gate, you're in the United States. It's a little island of it in the Sea of Russia, and that has been honored by all people since World War II. That you can't do that. It's being broken a lot, and this was a terrible thing because basically, so it's not the same thing when you're trying to goad Iran with terrorists and stuff. When you openly strike what is Tehran, what is Iran in another country, that means the Iranians are going to respond. That means they're, if now they, so up until today, it's really not if, it's when and how much. Um, and they're going to have a show of something that's going to, I think, what they hope will do, it'll be measured to it, but it'll also show just how easy it is for them to launch thousands of cruise missiles and hit everything strategic in Israel in one day and just devastate. Israel could look like Hamas's Gaza in 1 or 2 days with what Iran could do if they let loose all their thousands of cruise missiles and their thousands of ballistic Shahab missiles on this small little Israel. I've seen the target schematic. I mean, they even got lines of missiles that would literally take out piece by piece the entire fortifications of the ghetto of Gaza Strip via all those defense stuff, and it's like boom, 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 boom. Like they've got them all targeted. Every government building's targeted. Prime Minister's house, everybody's house is targeted. All the airports are targeted. All the air bases are targeted. All the connections to the nuclear reactor center targeted. Um, Not the reactor itself, because that would probably melt down on them, but all the things that gives it power to the rest of Israel will be gone. All that infrastructure will be wiped out. Israel will go back into the pre-industrial age in about 48 hours. No electricity, no way to pump water in a desert, and they'll probably keep the main international at Tel Aviv open, because what will happen is millions of Israelis will leave. They'll go back to America, they'll go back to Argentina, they'll go back to all the places they've lived before. And I would think that at a certain point, there will not be enough Israelis to run Israel, and it will just simply de facto go back to the Palestinians that are left standing. That is one possibility. Um, the or there's, it seems that, and it may just be a ruse, but it was very surprising this morning. I woke up to find out that suddenly the major battalions that had been 4.5 months in southern Gaza Strip pulled up, moving out, and declaring that the third stage of the war with Hamas is now in, which means everybody's getting out. All Israeli armed forces are no longer going to fight, but they're going to keep a buffer around the area. Now, the brigades in North Gaza are not leaving yet. The other thing that was floated by the Iranians, at first they were floating to the United States. United States said, we're trying to see, don't hit us. We didn't make this decision to hit your embassy. But when it evolved to another state where the Iranians came back and said, if you get Israel to make a complete ceasefire permanent, then the next step would be, he didn't say this, but he said, then this is the one way we won't strike Israel for what they did. If you get them, and if they agree to end this war with a complete, the UN ceasefire, permanent, that means the UN and peace people come in. That means, and the move that they made of the forces out of southern Lebanon. Now, of course, they said, like in Jerusalem Post, which is more right-wing point of view, they say, well, it's 4 months. We need to do a refit and rest for these guys, just like they did with the other guys earlier in North Gaza and were replaced. So that could be it. And they all said, look, any moment we could go right back in if we have to. But so then Ascod Harbor was opened for the humanitarian aid to get in, not just Egypt. This whole thing about, it's ironic that 7 white people have to die. All those brown people, they were getting killed by the tens of thousands. It didn't wake up the world. But when those people were evilly, just systematically killed by missiles, that was to scare those. They were famous, they were celebrities, and they were doing good work, but they were clearly targeted systematically and destroyed, and there was no mistake. And that really pissed off the world more than any. But it's funny how something will trigger it. Something that might not even be the most important thing when so much more things that are more important that should have triggered them. But okay, whatever triggers people in this media looking at everything world, all right, it triggered them this way. And it really hit Netanyahu hard. I think it finally, I think. I don't know. This is all very fluid, everybody. This stuff is just coming out now. And what looks intriguing though is them moving unilaterally is actually fulfilling in part, not the North yet, but it's like if I'm Hamas, I'm looking at them and saying, that was our next, before we actually, when the ceasefire happens, the next thing is the Israelis have to leave the Gaza Strip and leave it to us. Kind of half there. It looks that way. Or is it just half enough to look like that so they can come back and hit them harder later? That's still possible. Now, how we'll know that there's something to this is if the brigades of Israeli soldiers in the north also leave. And then there's no disruption of all the food coming in. Because literally, there's about 1 million people that in the next 3 months are going to start starving. And we may see, if this keeps going the way it's going for the next 3 months, you'll see half of the Palestinians die. And they'll mostly be the young minors under the age of 18, babies, children, women, and it'll be half will starve. It's getting that serious, especially in the north where there's like 200 to 400,000 still hiding in the ruins up there. So but if these people pull back in the north, then maybe they're going to try. It doesn't mean it'll work, because this is what will happen to Netanyahu is probably that's the end of him. But frankly, if Gantz or any of the other guys that are waiting in the wings, some of them are, I mean, people forget the reason why Netanyahu has been able to cat herd these more extreme right-wing governments after another and after another is because he's the most moderate. My contention is because he can like work them all together and cat herd them because he's not Ben Gvir, who's crazy. He's not, these people are talking about using atomic weapons on them at the get-go. Solve the problem right there. Oh, what about the rest of the world? Nah, I don't care about it. He would like be saying, you can't quite do that. So it may be the end of Netanyahu, but it doesn't mean it's the end of it might be even somebody more extreme becoming who's more directly related to the military and all that, like Benny Gantz. So we've entered a possibility. These lunar eclipses don't just mean change is bad. The change can be very good, the end of a problem. So so this heavenly portent, when the two eclipses, the eclipse that happened in 2017 and this in 2024, have basically writ a shadow down this angle on the 48 states that is going to have another shadow crisscross it right over the New Madrid fault line in Missouri. Both have been hit. August 25th, 2017, that great eclipse came. Now, in this one tomorrow, it will pass over the New Madrid fault line. Now, I've made points before that there's a lot of seismic activity that seems to happen around eclipses. I think by chance New York got rattled. Did you feel it when it was
Honestly, I was talking to someone on the phone when it actually happened. I didn't even know it happened, but I
Yeah,
was moving around, I was moving around while I was talking.
yeah,
So the people that felt it, because it was only a 4.8 and the epicenter was in New Jersey, not New York.
yeah.
If you were sitting
My
at a
house.
desk, you would probably feel it. But if you're walking around, you're probably not going to feel it.
Well,
So, but in New Jersey, it was much worse.
oh yeah. I mean, I actually, I'm from Southern California. I've survived Silmar quakes and all, the big ones, and I've been through. I could tell stories for a future show about some of the seismic experiences I've had growing up in the West Coast. But one thing is true, like if you're walking down the street, you won't even feel a 5.2. because that happened to me. But if
Mhm.
you're sitting, you'll feel it.
You'll
If you're
feel
laying
like this little
down,
sway.
or
You'll
you
feel a
hear a
sway if
little,
you're so.
or as one of the guys was saying, one of the talk show guys was saying, he says, well, up in my apartment, things creak in New York when you're up like 50 floors and stuff. You'll feel some things creak. This was different. It was like, and then I saw a lot of security cameras showing it was good because it was shallow. I think it was only like 10, maybe less than 10 miles down. That's very shallow. So high resonance. So even a small quake can make a lot of. I remember there was a 3-pointer in Newcastle and Sydney in Australia area, and it wasn't that. It was very shallow, and it really screwed up downtown Newcastle because uh, it was so shallowness. I mean, the Nisqually quake, which I missed because I was in India in March of 2001. Uh, if it had been a shallow quake, Seattle would have been on fire with at least 5 to 10,000 dead. But it was like 40 kilometers down. So, but if it was like 10 less, it would have been like Christchurch in New Zealand and all. So yeah. But the problem with this situation is that it could end up, if in the next days, weeks, months, or up to 6 years. Um, New Madrid is a kind of a fault line that it doesn't do a lot. It keeps down in the 1s and 2 magnitudes. So it's moving a little like that. But the last time it had, the end of December 2011 and into January 2018, 1812, January 1812, and a little bit into February, it had a 7.5, an 8, and a 7.6, 3 major quakes in that little period of time. And because it's a very old part of the tectonic shelves, it resonates a lot longer. That's why it was so widespread over the New York area and Connecticut. People were feeling in Philadelphia, and yeah, because in California, I mean, the Whittier quake happened. My brother was in the middle of it, and we didn't even feel it, and because of this, the younger tectonics don't travel that much. But the older are old, and uh, when the 1812 quake hit, church bells in Boston were ringing from the shake all the way to Boston, like what, over 1,000 miles.
Wow.
They were ding dong everywhere, and people, what's going on? What's going on? And so people were feeling a bigger shake than what was felt in New York that far away when this happens. And so what then happens is that Memphis, I mean, there were only like a few hundred people, settlers there, trappers and people living in that area. Now you've got St. Louis with 4.5 million metropolitan area, and you've got Memphis with about 2.5 million metropolitan area, all around that area. In 1812, the Mississippi River changed course. It actually, part of the plate lifted and turned it into a waterfall for a temporary period of time before it wore it down. There's lakes around there that were created by that. So you can see the mark of that great earthquake series of 3 quakes. Now, this area has no earthquake proofing at all. It's brick and mortar. They just never got around to seismic things. If there's 8 and 7 and 2 sevens, if that were to be repeated now, a lot of seismologists were saying this would be the greatest disaster in U.S. history. It would be, a lot of the bridges would go down the Mississippi, all the connections that keep the East and the West connected would go down. It would be devastating across northern Mississippi, eastern Arkansas, southeastern Missouri, all the way past St. Louis would be heavily impacted, and western Tennessee. I mean, big tracts because the shake would really be felt over a much larger area than these quakes usually do. Um, and yeah, it would. I hope this doesn't happen, but it seems a strange thing that Rome never had its famous earthquake where Saint Sebastian got hit with all the arrows. They didn't have that until like 400 AD or something like that. So I mean, there was, except for Pompeii, in 79 AD, you don't hear of some vast earthquakes taking down Rome. But right when it was ending, there was one. You know, and it makes you wonder, sometimes there seems to be a play with forces, not just political that quake, but also physical, that there's an interconnection with a lot of this going on. So hope I'm wrong about a lot of that, but if one of my theories goes, the last earthquake actually didn't do a whole lot of rumbling on the shadow, exactly on the shadow, but within 70 degrees to 50 degrees away from the shadow being total. And if that's the case, then Pacific Northwest, where I live, is going to also see some major seismic events in the coming few weeks, months, or years, as well as down in Colorado and some other areas. So it's hopefully that doesn't happen. Now, sometimes, like in the great eclipse of August 1999, which Nostradamus even dated, talked about a shadow over Flanders Field. The umbra would go over Flanders Field. It did. He saw that in 1557, I think. And he talked about it as a big marker for a lot of great changes. And he described the areas of antiquity to be upset. Well, it did cast a shadow into Israel and into Roman ruins, and all the Turkey within Greece had, within a week or two, had a couple major earthquakes. And then in the latter half of August was really the worst earthquake in our lifetimes in Istanbul and that area, in the Marmara Sea. Some of the towns sank 15 feet. The downtowns were 15 feet in water, just like boom, just like that. And then it hit farther down, and then a year later, it hit Bam in Baluchistan, Iran, which is an ancient town, not very earthquake proof, never usually had anything happen. It had totality in 1999. A year later, it was flattened, and bam went bam. and so then there was a 10-year hiatus, and then in 2009 another great eclipse happened, came, where the eclipse ended in 1999. In 2 years later, the Gujarat quake, which I just missed actually being in. I was flying in just a day or two after it happened. I flew over the Ran of Kutch, and everything was destroyed. It was amazing. And so that was a major, at least 100,000 people died in that area in Gujarat. And now, 9 years later, coming out of Gujarat from the Indian Ocean was a new one that passed over the Himalayan kingdoms, and then it went across China, and it ended up going into the Ryukyu Island regions of Japan, which gave it a 70 to 40 degree totality over Honshu eastern coast, where a year later, or actually months later, not quite a year, you had the Tohoku quake and tsunami. And you had a major Sikkim, Bhutan, which never got earthquakes, got a major earthquake in the Himalayas. It went over Shanghai. It was seen by most of the people of planet Earth because it's all really populated parts. But it passed over the Samoa, Western Samoa, and there was major stuff, tidal waves and stuff in Western Samoa as well. So I started thinking, well, there's kind of a pattern here. But then, just to be fair, in the 1918 time, when the eclipse went over the same area that 2017 experienced, which kind of marked the beginning of a change called the American century beginning. And so in my book about this great American eclipse, earthquake and tsunami, it's available on Amazon and as a physical book as well as an ebook. I go through these, also talking about the 1918 quake, which happened, a 1918 eclipse, which in Europe was when the American army was making their stand and stopped the final German offensive, which kind of made America literally, okay, we're a force to be reckoned with in the world. So I said, this is the beginning of the American century. And nearly a century later, in 2017, we started with two eclipses crisscrossing the lower 48. in less than 7 years. I've called this the kind of twilight zone between the end of the hegemonic American century and the beginning of a multipolar century. I call it the BRICS century, named after the BRICS alliance, which has Russia and China and South Africa. And it's not a mistake that South Africa stood up and was the country that first started judging Israel in the international court for genocide. It's the kind of the karma they share. And the karma that America shares with Israel is that we are their best buddies and friends and enablers, because one could make the argument, given the quotes of Amalek, which are openly about a successful genocide of an entire people, men, women, and children, and animals, that ancient Israel has gotten away with genocides because God meant it to happen, said Samuel, but no one ever checks. Samuel's not gone to a psychiatrist yet. We don't know. And the other situation is that America has gotten away with genocide with the 500 nations of the native peoples of North America. So we share the same karma. We got away with it. Don't know if we're going to get away with it this time. We can if we just stop it and not go there. And so, I mean, Biden's motivations are not human, I contend. He's a politician. He wants to win the election. And so he doesn't give a damn about Palestinians or anybody. He just wants to win his election, whatever he can give a damn about anything left in his brain. And so he's doing this to win back all the people, because he's lost the Democratic Party too. But people are leaving him. He's lost the world because we are the people arming this genocide. Only us. Maybe the British are throwing some stuff in there. They would like to. So maybe this is a change, and I'll finish with this. I come back to that same theme that often comes up, especially now, because it's really the test of it. I talk about how there's a spiritual theory that many masters of the 20th century had. It goes all the way back to 500 BC in India. The idea that if there's a few extra great teachers, religious, enlightened people than the norm for the population, that consciousness will then bear down its quality on a great gathering of darkness of unconsciousness, balancing it out. Well, there's a great darkness descending on this world of man. So therefore, the counterbalance of light is also there. And it doesn't have to be a lot, just 200 more people. In fact, in this set of articles, which I hope you guys will check them out when a few days the free versions are out, so you can sample them. And then when you see them, because I go probably more deep into this concept in this set of articles than I've done so far, is that the idea is that do what you can do in the world with your governments and things that if you want to demonstrate and all, but the real thing that could change everything is transforming yourself, becoming here now in the moment. Is if 200 people can allow that very nature to resurface and put aside obsessions about the future and the past and ego and all that. If we get another 200 people, that's just enough to tip the scales and balance out this darkness. So say people like Krishnamurti, Gurdjieff, and my own teacher, Osho. Gurdjieff thought it was 100, but I think Osho's got the number right, 200. A lot more people here, so the ratio has to be a little bigger, but not much. And there's a core of 10,000 people that are working on themselves or trying to find the truth of their existence. And it's out of that pool. And they're not just people in my group. Osho used to remind us, no, these people I was always talking about the 10,000 Buddhas are here in this hall tonight. Of course, there are only 3,000 of us. They said, what do you mean? I said, well, they're not my sannyas disciples. A lot of them are not disciples of me, but they are the 10,000, which he claimed that he'd been trying to give energy to and during his time on the world to go deeper. And out of those 10,000 come the 200. And I've met, not expecting to, but in my readings, when I'm reading people, I've met a few of them. I've seen that they are around. Now, when Osho was asked, are the 200 here? He said yes. And he always will respond to the question as it's delivered. And if I had asked him, he might have said something different. Because I would say, Osho, are they not only here, but have they all become Buddhas like you? I wonder how he would have answered that. Some maybe, all maybe. I would hope he would say, yes, they're already there and don't worry about it. It's all going to be fine. And if it is all going to be fine, this thing that started today is going to suddenly turn this whole thing in a month or so around where all our tensions go down in Israel. Iran doesn't strike because Iran gets what it wants. It gets, I think even those generals would have preferred to die as martyrs to get the ceasefire and end all that killing. The Yemen is in this war only because Israel is committing genocide. The day they stop, Yemen lets the boats move wherever they want to go. It's so the genocide stops. If the genocide stops, if Israel comes to its senses and now has to find a way to rebuild trust in the world, which is turn its back on it, I would see that as a sign that, and if more signs like that happen, like in Ukraine, like in a future war, America wants to destroy its navy fighting against Taiwan and China. If these things look like nothing's going to stop them, but right at the verge, right at the line to cross into doomsday, they can't get across as much as they want to. I mean, look at Netanyahu. He wants it. But what if he can't? He just can't. Something stops him and the people behind him and the armies killing him and the Americans enabling him. Something stops. And they don't know why. No one, it's like, why the hell can't we take that last step and destroy ourselves? I'll never be able to prove or disprove it, at least in this form. Maybe in other forms, if they come, there's a clear understanding. For instance, the whole invisible world around us that we don't even really sense or feel, but it's there. If science helps, if there's a way to actually find the record of everything that had happened, will happen, and is happening, the Akashic record, then someday, if there's such a place, there will be a way to measure it, and we might break the barrier between the living and the beyond living situation and actually find out how history really went, and actually see that what the Pandits in 500 BC, when they felt there was these 10 years where India was in a state of grace and the kingdoms didn't fight and the caste systems were in harmony, and the only thing they could figure out, it built up and then lasted for 10 years and then it dwindled. And the thing they figured out was there were 5 great masters alive at the same time, really great ones, more than the usual in India. And they were Buddha, the youngest, the oldest was Mahavir, and then there was a Keshkambal and these other people. And so they figured that it was their grace and love and intelligence and teaching that was tipped the balance and brought peace to the entire region. And then when they slowly died, Mahavir being the oldest first, and finally when Buddha died, it began to diminish and they went back to wars and stuff like that. Well, this is derived this idea of 200. If the whole world could suddenly stop the madness. So we are all in this fascinating gambit, and I'm hopeful to see more unexpected surprises, like what may be happening, right, just starting today in Western Asia, in Israel. And if they keep happening, then I'm feeling we might make it through this unique, most dangerous period of our history. In these articles, I talk about the mouth that in time is as wide, the big opening maw of darkness that is wide as 6 months. It started in mid-March, it ends in mid-September. It's the most dangerous period in human history, where we have all kinds of ways to trigger our utter devastation. And if we get through, if we're still talking in October, maybe, just maybe, we have 200 more Buddhas watching over us than are usually around. And they're not even trying to, they're just living their light. They're not even crusading for this. They're just being authentic human beings fully in their full potential. In fact, you don't have to do anything about what's going on in Israel or stuff. You just have to become a Buddha or awakened one. You have to stop being um, you're all Buddhas already, Osho would say, but most of you, when you come into conditioning, you then become pretenders not to be Buddhas, which is another way of saying ego. You borrow all this knowledge from these people, your authority figures and all, and then you become a personality. And the personality is worshipped in this world, but the Buddha is not. So so it's all about not becoming a Buddha. You already are one, an awakened one. That's what it means. You were born with Buddha nature. You're living in the lotus paradise called Earth, whether you reflect your ego upon it and make it hell or not. So the only thing that's really needed to do is to brace the hypothesis, at least. Maybe it's not true. Just like any hypothesis, you got to test it and live it and see what happens. That we are born Buddhas, therefore that's why we can never find the Buddha or the Christ consciousness, because we are it. You can't find what you are, but you can be looking everywhere but where it is and get very frustrated and go back to being lost in this out there oriented world. But really, you've always been the Buddha, you're always been the Christ consciousness. You can be no other except somebody forgetting and then learning the ways of the world, which is to play the game of pretending not to be the Christ, the Buddha. So as a kid, you're perfect at pretending and doing these things because you're innocent, you're open. Enlightenment's the ultimate innocence, but this is taken for granted. And so because the society doesn't like keep the thread alive in you. So now that thing you brought in, this is why you're a gift to all of us. You have not lost, you've not stopped, you haven't started to pretend not to be this like we have, your teachers have. And so and so then so if it's so all you need to look at is not to find the Buddha, just presume if it's false, you'll soon find out. Presume that you are in the hypothesis are a Buddha who is pretending not to be a Buddha, or a Christ is pretending not to be a Christ. And, being a Christian is not being a Christ. Being a Buddhist is not being a Buddha. It's somebody who worships the idea. Well, that's taking you out of it. That's pretending not to be a Buddha. You can't be in a religion as a Buddha because you are the Buddha. You can't be a Christian because you're supposed to be a Christ. It's the potential of every human being. It's already there. It's the divine source of everything. You just have to turn in while you're living your outward world, find the balance and see how all you have to do is become a seer. Meditation is about becoming a seer. You begin to see and witness without judging for or against. It's like you start living your movie and watching your movie. And the more you watch the movie, you become aware of the thing you've forgotten, the Buddha. Because what can watch it but that which is forgotten? Because the pretending, now we're watching the pretending not to be the Buddha out there. If you start watching it, the pretenses start falling off slowly, slowly. The mirror of watching reflects perfectly you pretending not to be a Christ. And as you and each moment it's fresh, the dust of ego and identity clears the mirror, and you begin to see the picture without even doing anything. In fact, you cannot do anything. You can only understand. Understanding is all. And the understanding comes from being a witness. And then when you witness it, you're not trying to any goal. All goals and things are things that ego wants. If you're already here, you don't have to get here. You're already a Buddha. You don't have to get to becoming a Buddha or a Christ. And so, the Christ means the anointed one. Buddha means an awakened one. These so it's incredibly simple, and simple things are incredibly hard for an ego to understand because the ego is pretending to be something it's not, a Buddha. So I will leave it at that.
I want to make sure that the audience is reminded that the link is in the description of this video and all the videos that I have done with John. Please click that link. That will take you to his website, and you'll be able to buy his periodical, and you'll also be able to get a reading. And if maybe just before we go, just really quick, explain what a reading would be for the audience.
Well, a lot of the reading is like it's just you and me, and and I for the same energy on you, and I use a little bit of astrology to find how the Kelly Blue Book of your body, mind, ego is the astrology chart. And I usually have you, so you get it at astro.com. I give you the instructions how you get it. It's free. And you just send it to me. And it's the best chart for my eyes and stuff to use. And then the other thing is that, we'll just use the Osho Zen Tarot deck. It's a tarot deck that I use to do a Celtic cross reading that will go deeper in than the astrology. And it often happens that it becomes like a bridge table here because I'll start a Celtic cross, and then there'll be a card that's kind of saying, pull out and do a cross on me. And then sometimes I do that. It doesn't always happen, but you'll get a feeling. You'll both be feeling it when we're onto something, where we're coming into what the answer, the image is trying to coalesce. And I often talk about the meditations that are tailored for the needs of our mind amplified world. And often, I don't always do it, but often I will ask the person if they'd be interested in trying the same techniques that I've been using since 1980. I try never to talk about things that are not my own experience. And so there are other great meditation techniques out there, but I know these meditation techniques from Osho, and they are remarkable for me. And I'm always ready to give them freely to anyone. I mean, even if you don't want a reading, you can ask me for them. And the way to do it is that I have a link that Paul's talking about, and you go there, and it will all you need to do is in the email put Hogue reading, and that's the easiest way for me to find it because I get hundreds of emails a day. So um, and then I'll get back to you, and then I'll give you the full times and a little more instruction about it and how to do Zoom. It's very easy. And then we'll set up a time and we'll do it. And I can adjust my times. I do 5 o'clock for America, PM Pacific. I do now for Europe, I do 11 o'clock AM Pacific time. And it also seems sometimes a year to work well in Australia as well. Well, I might do it at 10 o'clock for them, so, but it's another day. Anyway, I don't want to blow your minds with that because unless you're Australians, you understand what I'm talking about. The international dateline has caught me often watching myself having a brain freeze, like, my dyslexia kind of just goes, and I just watch myself going, and then I wait, and it goes away, and then I figure it out. But yeah, so we do, we do these readings. I say they're usually 90 minutes, but and sometimes they are, sometimes they're shorter. They're as long as they need to be. Sometimes they're very long. So it's mm, I I yeah, it's mostly a lot of fun, and most everybody that's gone through it really just had a real journey with me into this exploration. Said it was like the most unique stuff they'd ever gone did, and also, you know, I am a celebrity reader, and I try, but I don't like to do the celebrity reader thing where I make it like 500 or $1,000 or something because I'm John Hogue, Nostradamus expert, you know. But I try, but I have to have a yes for something that can pay my bills and stuff. But I keep the price low, uh, pretty low, you know, for these things. But anyway, you should check it out. And I'd love to see you. And if you have a yes for it, we'll have an interesting, insightful time. And it'll be a journey for both of us because as a medium, I don't control anything. I'm just, I don't open or close any doors. It's Osho initiated me into this work to find this way of innocently just stepping out and feeling the presence of the Buddha that we all are. And then whatever comes out of that, if whatever's said or done is right.
Okay. Well, we'll leave it at that. So, audience, please click the link. Take it takes you to John's website, and there's in that description you'll be able to sign up for everything you need to sign up for. I do recommend the reading because I did have one about 4 years ago, actually.
Yeah, about 4 years.
But I do recommend it. So thank you, John, for coming on the channel. And you have to say goodbye to everybody.
Goodbye, everyone. I love you all.
Okay, let me stop the recording here, John.